Hi, everybody. My name is Ella Marks, and this is my presentation titled Whose Voices Count? A Discourse Analysis of Gender, Race, and Class Within Condom Distribution During the BU Takeover of the Chelsea Public Schools. What is my project, really? My final deliverable was this paper, the title page is shown here, where I essentially am investigating this BU Chelsea partnership that began in 1989. And so what this is the Chelsea Public Schools were taken over by BU management team, where BU essentially came in and replaced all of the leadership in the school district. And this is important because it's the first and only full-scale private takeover of a public school district. And then within this, I'm focusing really on a debate that occurred in 1994 over condom distribution at the high school. And really why I'm doing this is to sort of narrow the scope of a project. We'll find out later that, this ended up lasting over 20 years, and so there was a lot more that I could have talked about but didn't have time to do within the scope of this project. And so focusing on the condom distribution issue, Chelsea and the students and teachers at the high school were pro-distributing condoms, and BU was against this. And this is notable because it's the only time that Chelsea overruled a decision made by the BU management team. And essentially what I talk about in my paper is how this was in tension with the fact that BU was really kind of obsessed with the teen pregnancy rate in Chelsea at this time. And so I thought that it was a good opportunity to talk about what was published in the media about Chelsea at this time and why this is relevant. So a little bit of background on Chelsea. It's just north of Boston and is a very small city in square mileage, but is very densely populated. And at the time of the takeover, half of the residents identified as Hispanic or Latino, and 70% of students qualified for free or reduced price lunch. And it's also worth noting that the city entered state receivership in 1991 because of political and fiscal city mismanagement. So there were a lot of good reasons that they needed to outsource help for their schools, but we'll come to see whether or not this was actually helpful later on. A little bit of background of our school in the 90s. John Silver was the president of BU. I talk a lot about him in my paper if you want to learn more about him. He was a very controversial leader. And then I do just want to add, because we all know BU is a private institution, that it really was management control of BU and not financial influence. We were able to come in and adjust the budget in Chelsea, but there was no extra funds being provided. And so essentially I was working on a directed study with Professor Dobbs, who advised this project, before I started writing my Keystone. And we learned that, or she told me that there are boxes and boxes of archives of all the meeting notes and all the files about this partnership in the BU library in the Gottlieb Center. And so I was really interested in kind of reading more firsthand accounts of what was going on at this time, because there really wasn't as much as I expected available online. And so I was able to go and look at a lot of firsthand accounts and found these files about this condom distribution debate, and really came to realize that what BU was saying versus what Chelsea was saying versus what was and wasn't published and what was available online was kind of all telling a different story. And so I was really excited to highlight this sort of more untold education narrative of what was going on in Chelsea at the time. And I was really interested in asking the question, who gets to define problems and find solutions in public education? So here you can see a lot of the headlines that I read from the paper files. And I chose to focus on newspaper articles from the Boston Globe, the Chelsea Record, and the Harvard Crimson, as well as a lot of internal memos and surveys from BU and Chelsea. And then essentially what I was doing in my discourse analysis is looking at how this debate of condom distribution and talk about teenage pregnancy was categorized and what this meant for the perception of Chelsea. And so essentially what I did is I narrowed down to three categories of how I was going to pay attention to the quotes that I was reading. Framing looks at how Chelsea is set up to look a certain way outside of the condom distribution issue. Voice looks at who is speaking or being spoken about. And moral language looks at things like responsibility, promiscuity, and disrespect in contrast to narratives of public health. I basically pulled a bunch of quotes that were talking about pregnancy or the condom distribution issue. And I put these two on the board because I thought that they really illustrated the kind of things that I was reading, just to sort of give you a glimpse into it through this presentation. So the first is from an article that talked about the early stages of the partnership and says 25% of all teenage girls in Chelsea are either pregnant or already mothers. And then the second quote is a quote from Silber, which says, "We are saying, in essence, that we do not believe our students are capable of sexual restraint and that we expect them to fail. Condoms, like filtered cigarettes, may minimize risk but still promote hurtful behavior." So going back to this, I think that obviously there's a contradiction here in terms of this idea that a quarter of the girls in Chelsea are pregnant or mothers, and that Silber thinks that condom distribution is going to encourage promiscuity. And so ultimately, you can see that sort of the problems identified by the people and students in Chelsea and the problems identified by Silber and BU are kind of separating. And what I come to find out by collecting many more quotes and reading many more articles is that BU frequently used teen pregnancy as a metric for district success. And so they were really able to kind of like paint a moral picture of Chelsea and the students there as being promiscuous or morally incorrect, and using that as a reason for BU's involvement instead of bigger structural inequities like poverty, like job security for parents, and things like drug and alcohol abuse in high school, things like that. And so there was sort of this prioritization of these abstract problems of like the moral incorrectness of Chelsea versus the concrete support that the students and teachers at the school were asking for. And so I think that this document really illustrates that well, because it's a unpublished survey from the guidance department at Chelsea High School, which says, the writing here I've just typed below, it says, "The only thing that I have to say about the guidance office is that it's understaffed. The staff they have are great." And there are pages and pages of surveys like this from the students at the high school, basically detailing that the teachers and the support that they do have are good, they just need more of it. And so ultimately, by using this teen pregnancy marker as justification for their control and using moral language and selective crisis framing to establish their governance over the district, BU really was able to shape sort of the public perception of Chelsea at the time. And I think that it's important to pay attention to the fact that there are all these unpublished documents, like, you know, basically sitting in our library, that tell a very different story than what happens when you Google this. And so I think that this is even more important because this really stands as a singular model of private takeover of a public school district and urban education reform, and that there just really is more to the story. I think it's important to highlight all stakeholders in this and just make sure that we're looking really critically at what this model of urban reform is telling us, and ask questions like, who is making decisions for public education, and what does this mean for reform efforts going forward? So you can scan to read my whole paper and the rest of my thoughts on this here, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions? No? All good? Over here? All right, perfect.
Hi, you did amazing.
Thank you.
I'm so interested to see how your project has been formed over the past year and a half. You mentioned a lot about digging into the archives by hand. How was that experience for you, seeing physical remnants of the things that you had read about online or maybe not read about?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. I think first, just in like scale, there's like so many boxes of these hanging folders, and the way that it works is that essentially I can say like, oh, pull these 5 boxes for me, I want to read through them, and I don't think you really realize how much there is to read until you're sitting with so many boxes. And I think really beyond that, it was just the fact that when looking sort of at the condom distribution thing specifically, that it contextualized so much of what I was reading about, like in the time period of which it was set. Like, I think coming off the heels of like the AIDS crisis and all of this, like there were a lot of files and even like flyers that would be tacked up around the school that I think just painted a more comprehensive like historical picture of what was going on, and just influenced my perspective more holistically about what I was writing about. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Over here.
Thanks. You said that the Chelsea Public Schools decided to override the decision by BU. I'm curious to know if you know what happened after that. Did teen pregnancy reduce? Or?
I don't know specifically what happened with the teen pregnancy statistic immediately after. Condoms were distributed at the high school. I think that, and I talk about this more in my paper, but BU essentially had 17 concrete goals that were very quantitative in regards to what they were doing in Chelsea, which involved things like graduation rate, student retention, things like that. And all in all, those goals were met. So I say this more in the paper, but I think that I'm not saying that BU failed necessarily, because in a lot of ways the schools were improved, and I think that's worth noting as well. I wouldn't be shocked if the teen pregnancy statistic lowered. I don't know if that can be separated though from BU's influence versus this condom distribution issue specifically. But it's more, I think, about how do we reckon with there being a quantitative success, but also the fact that if public perception and this sort of morality issue is happening at the same time, who is that helping and who is that hurting, kind of thing, if that answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more.
Moving forward into your career in education, how do you feel like this project informs your perspective on teaching at different schools in different places with different perceptions and the different demographics that address these more serious issues like teen pregnancy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know it says psychology up on the board, which I am a psychology major, but really my heart lies in education and at Wheelock. And I think that so much of what I've loved about my education here is how it has this kind of justice and equity-based lens. And I think that just carrying that perspective with me and having had my entire degree influenced by that lens will just fundamentally impact how I make decisions, especially in a school setting going forward. And so I think this really just adds a drop in that bucket of that is my perspective, because that's how I've been taught, I guess, if that makes sense. But it was interesting and great to kind of put my own spin on it and choose what part of this partnership I wanted to focus on and everything. And I'm very passionate about reproductive and sexual health and implementing that in curriculums even today. So yeah, it was very interesting, gratifying for me.
Awesome, that's all the time we have.
Thank you.
And Xander will be up next.